Hello there guys, what is going on? Son of Chelsea back here again for my team selector ahead of the game tomorrow against Brighton in the Premier League. Graham Potter returns to his old club, same for Marc Cucurella. Expected narrative is very high going into this game, and obviously that's going to be a lot of the focus surrounding the coverage of this game between Brighton and Chelsea tomorrow. Tactically, I think there's going to be a lot of interest in terms of how both coaches line up and how both try to counteract each other. Will there be some sort of surprise switches in terms of where players are positioned? We will see, given how Potter set up Chelsea's team, particularly against Salzburg, and Potter's, of course, extensive knowledge of the Brighton squad. From a Chelsea perspective, I think for me, the next three, because we only got 3 league games now before the break for the World Cup, and they are difficult games, all in their own right, and the dream scenario is obviously getting maximum points, which would put Chelsea in a really, really good position, because we're seeing teams in and around Chelsea starting to drop points. You know, Tottenham have not been in the best of form, which made, of course, the drop points against Brentford and Man United quite frustrating. But I feel this is the case for a lot of teams in the Premier League, and particularly for Chelsea in what is a unique time. Just maintaining our position in and around the top 4 is kind of the big thing for me. Can Chelsea get around 7 points out of the next 3 games? I think that'd be a really strong return given some of the opposition we're up against. And just make it so by the time we return on Boxing Day against Bournemouth, we're in and around the conversation. We're in a healthy place where we can just kick back into things and hopefully continue our sort of chase for Champions League qualification, which I do think is going to be the main goal of this year. And that's kind of the main thing. It's an awkward, unique time where a lot of coaches are having to juggle a lot of things, a lot of competitions, and particularly when we've got the likes of Wesley Fofana and Reece James out, hopefully going to be back after the World Cup. It's just about, as I say, putting us in the healthiest position, even if it's not perfect by the end of this sort of little run for Chelsea. If we can be in and around that conversation, I don't think you can get too downhearted based on what has been quite a turbulent start to the year for Chelsea, and also just naturally in the Premier League. In today's team selector, as we always do, going to look at the opposition, look at how Brighton are doing under De Zerbi so far, some of the key threats, then going into my predicted lineup for Chelsea. Before we do get into any of that good stuff, I want to ask you guys, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you don't miss any of the uploads on the channel. Do me a favour as well by hitting that like button, because it helps new people find the channel as well. But let's get into Brighton and how they're doing since, of course, Graham Potter left. De Zerbi has not won a game so far. 5 played, 2 draws, 3 defeats. And they have faced some difficult opposition in that time, namely Man City in their last game away from home. That is not a good challenge. I mean, they went away to Anfield in De Zerbi's first game and they got a really good draw in that game. You know, scored 3 times, did concede 3 times, but it was a good point for Brighton. It really was, and it showed sort of that attacking football and that base that De Zerbi was going to try and build upon, that Potter, of course, had worked on since 2019. And I think they still are doing those Brighton things that, you know, became very familiar with Graham Potter. They are a team still. I watched them against, say, Nottingham Forest, a game that they probably should have won. They create a lot of good opportunities and just don't have that finishing touch. That kind of became a frustrating theme for Brighton, and comparable in some ways to the problems Chelsea have had in the final third across recent years. There have been slight tweaks, obviously, as any new coach comes in, but you still watch Brighton and you still see similar trends there, and that may take a little bit of time for De Zerbi to really get his imprint on the team of what he wants to do, but I think it's a smart transition, like how Chelsea have gone from Tuchel to Potter. I think going from Potter to De Zerbi, it's not a radical shift tactically. It's not bringing in someone who's going to try and implement a completely different idea of football with a squad that is not his, which is smart for a club like Brighton, and it's not that surprising they go for a profile like De Zerbi. High pressing, particularly, once again, the use of wing backs, that has not changed for Brighton, and particularly Leandro Trossard, who Chelsea have been linked with quite naturally, is kind of their best player so far this season in terms of goals. 6 so far this season and 1 assist. When you do watch him down that left wing, since he's been converted as a wing back, how dangerous he can be, how threatening, how direct. There are obviously other threats. I think Solly March as well, another converted wing-back who's really done a good job over recent years. McAllister had a really, really strong start to the year. Casado looks like a real gem for Brighton in central midfield. It's maybe just finding that final touch. And of course, for Chelsea, hopefully that won't be the case tomorrow. But Chelsea have not beaten Brighton in the Premier League since September 2020 at the AMEX. That was the opening game of the 2020-21 season under Frank Lampard. So a long time ago, the last 3 games have been draws. Both games last season ended 1-1. So hopefully Chelsea can find a winning touch tomorrow, because I do think it will be a close game. And I do think the wing backs very naturally for both teams are going to be quite key in this game. In those wide areas, how does Trossard do if he has a real impact down Chelsea's right, which of course is a bit of an awkward area for Graham Potter to deal with at the moment. You would have wanted Reece James to be available, because Chelsea really struggled, particularly against Marc Cucurella, ironically, last year when we did not have Reece James, but I think in the second game, and he got injured in the first one as well. So it's difficult, and that's something that Potter's having to juggle every game at the moment, how to counteract it. Let's get into Chelsea. The shame of it, no Kalidou Koulibaly. That was confirmed by Graham Potter in his pre-match press conference earlier today. There was some hope he could return, and I was kind of just jotting down a potential team this morning that did have Koulibaly in it. I think taking him out of it makes it slightly just a little bit more interesting, given what we saw against RB Salzburg, which arguably was the most wild of the selections or tactical sort of approaches that Graham Potter has gone for so far. At times in that first half, it did look like a 3-3-4 against Salzburg, which obviously comes with its risk. And, you know, does he go for that again? Does he look for a bit more defensive security? Is he looking at a threat like Trossard down the left and thinking to himself, I cannot have and allow the same space that maybe at times we sort of allowed ourselves and gave the risk of being exploited against Salzburg? I mean, their goal did come down that side creatively with Okafor in the second half, so maybe he'll be looking in that area as kind of one for concern. The first lineup I've gone for is not too dissimilar to the one that started against Salzburg, with one change to the team, and that is Mason Mount coming in for Conor Gallagher. I did think Conor Gallagher had a really good game in midweek, and he's just continuing to show now, even if it is a little bit under radar, he is now becoming a Chelsea player. Like, he does look very much up for this challenge, and he is at the level of a player you'd want. And I think he's settling nicely. Now he's in more attacking areas where he can really impact the game, and in areas where his just skill set's going to suit him a lot more for Chelsea, rather than really dropping deep and picking up the ball. Even like floating into wing back areas, which is quite interesting. I mean, everyone I think is going to play wing back, maybe not Kepa for Graham Potter, because it just seems like an area most players are going to find themselves in, as a lot of the Brighton players did when he was in charge. But of course, no Koulibaly. You kind of feel like Marc Cucurella had a decent showing, I think, against Salzburg, has had some difficult weeks. Hopefully he's finding form again. Thiago Silva and Trevor Chalobah, I think those two kind of have to be in any defence at the moment for Chelsea. Trevor Chalobah has really found form again and is proving his talent. And of course, Thiago Silva, despite that awkward landing at the end of the game against Salzburg, is once again in immaculate form. And even though you could sort of look at some of the frailties of Kepa at set pieces, I still think he is first choice. I think he still should be first choice for Chelsea. I think Mendy may get his chance against Zagreb, but I think at the moment Kepa is the first choice, absolutely. In central midfield, it always is a big debate. I mean, in midfield, Jorginho, I think, had some really good moments when Chelsea were trying to build up from deep, and you know, with a team like Brighton who will try and press Chelsea absolutely at home, you know, you do always think to yourself, with Jorginho, there are, you know, it's both sides of him. When you've got a team doing that and he's on his game, he can really make things happen. He can really get Chelsea out of tight areas. We can really progress the ball in those tight areas at the back quite quickly. And you saw that in some of the way we create chances against Salzburg. On the other end, when a team is pressing us and Chelsea don't really have a foothold on the game and don't have ways to get around that press, Jorginho obviously can be overrun. I think Mason Mount in any lineup probably comes back here. He got pretty close to a full rest against Salzburg. He came on late in the game. Mateo Kovacic off the back of that wonder strike. We probably have to wait a long time for the next one, but I felt his performance was probably his best so far this season. So I think he'll probably feature in some midfield for Graham Potter tomorrow. Kai Havertz, as you can see, you're probably like raising your eyebrows, like, why is Kai basically left wing back? I was looking at his heat map after the game against Salzburg, and he was effectively playing out wide on the left. It was really weird. Like, he was so dominant on that side, and obviously where he scored the goal was very central. He was picking up a lot of areas, as a lot of players were, quite fluidly interchanging. But I found it interesting in the first half. He was closer to Aubameyang, and then him and Sterling switched. And it seemed like for Kai Havertz, he got a lot more joy making those late runs into the box, maybe from the left. So whether, you know, Graham Potter's thinking about that again, and it's just kind of an experimental thing for one game that worked, we will see. But I do think Kai obviously has a real good chance of starting this game, because he had one of his best performances, probably his best performance of the season so far, and scored an absolutely spectacular winner for Chelsea in Salzburg. So hopefully he's full of confidence. And then, as you can see in his first lineup, Raheem Sterling and Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang as the front two. The second lineup here is slightly different. If Potter's thinking more conservative on the right side of Chelsea's sort of system, you bring back Cesar Azpilicueta as right wing back rather than having either Christian Pulisic or Raheem Sterling there. That's a big call, it really is, and I say this during every sort of team selector since Reece James has got injured. It's such a difficult balancing act from game to game, but you do have the threat of Trossard that you didn't really have against Salzburg, so I think you do need to obviously focus on that and try and nullify that if you can. Loftus-Cheek did not start in midweek, so is fresher than, say, Jorginho or Kovacic, may come back into the starting lineup here. As I say, Mount, Kovacic would kind of be two of those players I'd really be looking to start. Christian Pulisic, I think absolutely should be starting this game. I think he's looking hungry on the ball, and he's looking hungry in the way he's going about things at Chelsea at the moment, and I think that needs to be sort of rewarded with more starts, whether it is wing back, left wing, somewhere across the attacking line. I think he's looking also a little bit more influential on the ball, so I'd like to see him start again, and then rather than having Kai Havertz in some sort of weird wide role, we get him closer to Aubameyang. So those are my two lineups. Let me know yours in the comments below. I think it's going to be fascinating tomorrow to see how Chelsea line up, because from game to game it is unpredictable, but tomorrow is Graham Potter's 10th game in charge, so we're going to have more of a sample size now to look at the first block of games under him, and then the last few before we break for the World Cup, which obviously includes some big ties against Arsenal, Man City and Newcastle. So hopefully Chelsea can start off that final chapter before we do break for the World Cup with a win tomorrow at the AMEX. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Follow me on Twitter at SonOfChelsea, and I'll see you again very soon. All the best.